In this Nightreign video, we're going to be taking a look at the 4 Nightfarers of Elden Ring Nightreign, or the 4 classes, if you will. These are the 4 characters that you're going to get to choose from on any given run while you're playing through the game. The full launch of the game will include 8 of these, but for now we only have 4. So I want to run you through what these classes do, what they're capable of, and what their skills are to help you better decide which one you want to play come the network test in a couple days. So there are a few things I want to discuss first before we get into the specifics of each Nightfarer. And the first thing is I want to talk about the differences and similarities between Nightfarers. So the differences between Nightfarers are their appearance. They obviously all look different. They each have a different passive ability, a different character skill, and a different ultimate art. They each have their own starting equipment that they'll begin each run with. This is unique to Elden Ring Nightreign, and these weapons are not found in the base game of Elden Ring. And note that the weapons that Nightfarers begin with in Nightreign don't have passive bonuses like the equipment that you will pick up throughout your playthrough, so they're a little bit inferior compared to things you will find in chests generally. Each Nightfarer has its own HP, FP, and stamina, and each Nightfarer also has its own different colored relic slots. I will get into what relics are a little bit later in this video, but for now let's move on to similarities. The similarities between each Nightfarer are that they all have no armor. There is no armor in this game. They each can use any weapon that they pick up as long as they are the correct level or higher, and they all start at level 1 at the begin of any run. So looking at the starting HP, FP, and stamina across all 4 Nightfarers, you can see a few things instantly. You'll notice that Guardian and Wylder have more HP than Recluse and Duchess by a good ways, actually. And I think this is one of the reasons that these 2 classes will be played a lot and will be popular amongst new Nightreign players, is because it gives them a little bit of an advantage while they're learning how Nightreign plays, even though they're familiar with Elden Ring combat. And you'll notice that Duchess and Recluse, even though they have lower HP pools, have higher FP pools, meaning that they're going to be able to use more weapon abilities and spells more easily than either Wylder or Guardian. So these 2 classes have more of a higher skill floor, but also a higher skill ceiling. And keep in mind that each Nightfarer begins at level 1 at the beginning of every run, and that when you level up at a Site of Grace, your character is just going to level up automatically into the growth of that character. That means that your HP, FP, and stamina will grow depending on what character you chose, so Guardian should always remain ahead of Wylder in terms of HP, and Duchess and Recluse should always remain ahead of Guardian and Wylder in terms of their FP, even if they level up, assuming that they're the same level as each other, obviously. Okay, with those things out of the way, let's talk a little bit about each Nightfarer, and we'll start with Wylder first. Wylder is an all-around warrior. He has great abilities, and he's likely to be a fan favorite and probably will be the most played Nightfarer during the network test. He's very easy to learn and very fun to play. He begins the game with a great sword that has Stamp Uppercut on it as its weapon skill, and he also has a small shield that has Buckler Parry on it for those who like to parry. His passive ability, Sixth Sense, is extremely powerful. What it does is it makes it so that he cheats death a single time, meaning if he would take lethal damage that downed him, he will actually not be down that one time. And this is a really good passive ability for new players to Nightreign because it's going to prevent one death to them, and you're likely to die more when you're learning the mechanics of Nightreign. It's just a reality. So again, this is another reason that Wylder will be a new player friendly. What I don't know, though, is if this is just one single death it prevents in the entire run, if it refreshes after the end of each day, or if it refreshes each time you rest at a Site of Grace. These are things that need further testing. His character skill is called Claw Shot. What this skill does is it launches out a grappling claw that can pull enemies to him. It can pull himself to larger enemies like bosses. It can break the guard of enemies that have their shield up, allowing him to do a critical strike. And it can also grab the landscape and move him quickly across it as well. So it has a lot of different utility. It only has about a 6 or 7 cooldown as well, so you can use this all the time in combat. And keep in mind, too, that skills you use from your characters that aren't weapon skills or spells don't cost any FP, so you can basically use this every time it's off cooldown. His ultimate art is called Onslaught Stake. What Onslaught Stake does is it's a powerful attack using the stake that you can find on his left arm. That's one single strike that deals high damage and high stance damage in an explosion. Oftentimes, this ultimate art alone is enough to stance break some bosses, allowing you to go in for a critical strike. And keep in mind in this game, too, that your teammates can continue to attack the boss through the critical strike animation, making critical strikes and stance breaks even more deadly in Elden Ring Nightreign than they were in the base game. The one downside to this ultimate art is it has very short range and it's very easy to miss with the skill, doing nothing at all when you first learn how to use it. But keep in mind that you can use Claw Shot to pull yourself to a boss and then use this immediately afterward for a nice little 1-2 combo. Note that in order to use an ultimate art in Elden Ring Nightreign, you have to fill up your ultimate art gauge, and the way you do that is by attacking and damaging enemies and bosses. Ultimate arts don't have a cooldown like some character skills do, so you can't play passively and expect to use your ultimate art all the time, and you'll need to be aggressive in order to use this more often. Up next we have Guardian. Guardian is the best character for would-be tanks out there and those that prefer blocking to dodging. His ultimate is perfect for multiple enemy situations or for rezzing down teammates quickly. So as I mentioned earlier, Guardian has more HP and more stamina than any of the other Nightfarers you can play in the playtest, and he also begins with Guardian's Halberd and Guardian Great Shield. So between the higher HP, the higher stamina, which he can use for blocking, and a Great Shield, which is going to have better guard boost than a typical shield, he's kind of set up already to be a tank. His passive ability reads Plant Feet and Brace with a Shield for a more powerful guard, and what I think this skill does is that it makes it so that when he blocks heavy attacks, the attacks that would normally push you backward, where you roll backward and you pop up with your shield, you might not take any damage, but you still get knocked all the way backward. I don't think that can happen to Guardian, so he can tank even the most devastating attacks without being pushed backward significantly. His character skill Whirlwind does like a 360-degree cyclone of air around him for just a split second that knocks enemies up into the air that land on the ground, making them vulnerable to attacks from Guardian and his teammates. And it's just great for situations where you have a lot of enemies around you, or if maybe you have an enemy behind you that you don't have time to turn around quickly enough. Like maybe one of your teammates calls out to you, hey, behind you, and you pop it and you're fine. Guardian's ultimate art is called Wings of Salvation, and this is the one where you see him launch up into the air, float for a second, and then come crashing down in a large AoE that knocks enemies backward and down and deals significant damage. And this has two uses, predominantly for large groups of enemies, and secondly for rezzing teammates. It's a very safe, quick, effective way of rezzing teammates, especially if you maybe have like two teammates that are downed in the same spot during a boss fight. You can just use this and then land on them and res them. As the tank, Guardian is typically the last one alive unless you made a very critical error. So it's a good idea to save this ultimate art during some boss fights in case your teammates go down and you need a fast way to res them. Up next is Duchess. She's a little bit more challenging to play than Wylder, in my opinion, for a general attack type character, but she is more agile, she has a better dodge, and her restage skill is absolutely lethal in the right hands. Duchess has a little bit of a slow start, in my opinion, because she begins the game with a dagger, her dagger, Duchess's dagger, and some shield grease, and those are her only equipment to begin the game with. So if you don't like using a dagger or you want to use some other fast weapon that's like a longsword or a thrusting sword or something, you're going to have to find one before you can really take off with her. Duchess's dagger, though, does have a weapon skill that not only does an attack animation, but it buffs her dagger with magic damage simultaneously, so she can deal increased damage and buff herself from the beginning of the game. Her passive skill, Magnificent Pose, makes it so that she has the dodge that she has, and I'm pretty sure it also makes it so that she attacks faster with certain weapons than other Nightfarers. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what she does. Her character skill is called Restage, and what this does is it reapplies damage an enemy has taken over the last few seconds to nearby enemies. So this is a great way if you rip off bleed or something off a target, or you all downed it with a critical attack and then we're hitting it a couple times, to use this real quick. And this is the white phantom. You sort of see it come out of the lion and the other enemy there, the exile enemy, that reapplies that damage. And as I mentioned earlier, this can be really, really deadly if you have a player that's very versed in when is the best time to use this to maximize its effect. You don't want to hang on to it all the time, so you're never using it, but you don't want to use it when it's not necessary to use it. And finding the right moments to use it is really the key to one of the successes of playing Duchess. Duchess's ultimate art is called Finale. What this does is it makes her and nearby allies invisible for, I think, about 10 seconds. I don't know the exact amount of seconds, but it's somewhere like 8 to 10 seconds, somewhere in that range. If you're out of range, Duchess's range, when she casts this, you won't become invisible, I don't think. But it does make you guys invisible. Primary reason to do this would be to go into a room with a bunch of enemies and every person could go backstab one independently and you're not getting overwhelmed by lots of enemies. Or during a boss fight to give yourself a brief reprieve to heal or pick up a down teammate, or just to figure out what your strategy is and just give you a breather for a second. Can be very valuable during those times as well. And finally we come to Recluse, who's arguably the hardest character to learn, but nonetheless is very effective in the right hands. Being able to replenish FP almost at will, allows her to stay at a safe distance most of the time and prevent her from taking a lot of damage. So Recluse is basically your would-be mage class. She begins the game with a staff that has Glintstone Pebble on it and Glintstone Arc. So you have 2 spells at the beginning of every run you can use, and as you find other staffs, they'll have spells on them, so you can sub them out, or different spells as you pick them up. Or you can put one staff in one hand and one in the other, or you can use a Sacred Seal in one hand or the other. Because there are no intelligence, faith stats, or requirements or anything like that, she can use incantations and sorceries interchangeably, and it doesn't matter. But she will likely have a melee weapon in one hand and a casting implement in the other, or 2 casting implements. Now, she has kind of complicated mechanics compared to the other classes, but they're not that complicated once you understand how they work, and I'll try and explain how they work here. So the first thing to understand is her passive ability, Elemental Defense. This makes it so she can discover affinity residues that can be collected, replenish FP. And you predominantly see these when you damage enemies. You can sometimes collect these from allies as well. I don't know exactly why you can sometimes and not others. But generally this is going to happen from damaging enemies, and you can see after she uses Shattering Crystal on the Omen boss, a little blue circle kind of appears on his midsection. This circle indicates that she can collect a magic residue from that enemy, and in doing so, she'll gain FP. And this is what her character skill is, Magic Cocktail. Her character skill allows her to withdraw that FP from the character, and her passive skill allows her to see the elemental affinity that she can withdraw. There are different elements you can withdraw. Magic is blue, fire is orange, and I think lightning or holy are both yellow. I don't know if lightning and holy are both, and I think maybe only one of them is. But you'll see a different colored circle depending on the elemental affinity that you can withdraw from the target. And you can't see it in the gameplay footage because there's no UI, but down on the bottom of this screen, each time she uses Magic Cocktail, it will bank one element in this kind of triangle, and after she's filled that triangle by using that ability 3 times, the 4th cast of Magic Cocktail will do some sort of animation that has a special effect. And the effect that Magic Cocktail does when you use it that 4th time and dispel those 3 elemental residues that you've collected the first 3 casts is determined by what elemental affinities or residues you collected when you were using Triangle and L2 the first 3 times. You can see 2 examples in this gameplay footage. The first looks like a combination of fire, magic, and lightning residues, or fire, magic, and holy residues, which causes the Recluse to do an explosion on the target when she uses Magic Cocktail the 4th time. The other one is a blue ball that seems to be circling the bosses that's constantly damaging it, and I think, if I remember correctly, this is like a combination of magic affinities using it 3 times, or it's a combination of like magic twice and 1 other element, I believe. It sounds really complicated when you say it out loud, but the too long didn't read version of it is basically when you damage an enemy, you're going to siphon out FP from them, and every 4th time you siphon FP from them, instead of siphoning FP, you're going to do some crazy animation that has a special effect based on the elements that you pull. And these 2 abilities, Elemental Defense and Magic Cocktail, are really what make Recluse the mage class, because it's not just that she starts with a staff and some spells, because any character can use a staff and some spells. It's because she can continuously replenish her FP in order to keep spellcasting, and a large part of playing Recluse is the dance that you do between using Magic Cocktail to siphon FP and cast spells in order to deal damage, because Magic Cocktail doesn't deal any damage when you siphon FP. So you want to cast spells, use Magic Cocktail, cast a spell, use Magic Cocktail, cast a spell, use Magic Cocktail, and cast a spell, cause some detonation or some ability, and kind of do that dance is what playing Recluse is like. And it can be very difficult when you're trying to learn Elden Ring Nightreign's mechanics and learn to do that simultaneously. The ultimate ability for Recluse is called Soul Blood Song. You will see this in the gameplay footage, and what this does is it marks all nearby enemies and bosses with a mark for about 10 seconds or so. That makes it so when you or allies damage them, they replenish HP and FP for each time they hit them. So this is really good because this is kind of like a support ultimate, really. It allows your teammates some sustain, because sometimes you run out of healing potions during boss fights, and this can be very valuable in order to get some healing, or even replenish some FP for you if your FP is low. And it has a really long animation, so it's difficult to time sometimes, but it also has iframes allowing you to avoid damage if you use it through some devastating attack. And one other great thing I'll say about Recluse before I kind of stop talking about her is that because she has spells by default, they're very, very useful for rezzing teammates, because normally most of the other players are probably going to have predominantly melee weapons, and they have to run up to a player and hit them with melee attacks in order to res them, unless you're using Guardian's Ultimate. But she can do so at range with like Soul Pebble or some other spell, She can lock on to a player that's down and hit them at range with spells in order to pick them up, making her a great support character as well as a great offensive player if played correctly. So the last thing that I'll talk about in this video is Relics. This is not something you saw during the gameplay footage, but it's something we got experience with during our test session. Every run you do through Elden Ring Nightreign, whether you succeed or fail, you're going to get something called Relics. Relics are essentially passive upgrades that you can apply at Round Table Hold in between each run that give you some sort of passive benefit that will improve your character and are kind of like the permanent progression that you gain as you play through Elden Ring Nightreign. Each Nightfarer has 3 relic slots, and their relic slots are all color-coded, meaning they can only use relics of the colors that are available to them. For instance, like Duchess has green, 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 meaning that she can only use green relics, and she cannot use other colors. So after your first couple of runs in the Nightreign network test, you're not going to have enough relics to go around for all of your characters, and they won't be the right ones that you need for some of them. But there's also variants of certain relics. For instance, you have qualities, like you have Delicate, Polished, and Grand. Delicate relics have 1 passive bonus, Polished relics have 2 passive bonuses, and Grand have 3 passive bonuses. If they're named the same otherwise, then you can bank that the Polished version has the same 2 bonuses that the Grand version does. The Grand version just has 1 more. And lastly, there are specific relics that you can get that only benefit certain characters, like their passive benefit only applies if it's slotted into Duchess, or only applies if it's slotted into Guardian. So you want to be on the lookout for those and slot them into the appropriate Nightfarer for maximum impact. I really wish I could show you this, but we will have all this on the wiki for the network test. I don't have all of these currently, but as the network test continues, we'll keep adding them and updating them so you can see what all of these are. So that wraps up our video on the Nightfarers or classes of Elden Ring Nightreign. I hope this gave you some insight into them if you're playing the network test, or maybe you just wanted more information even if you're not playing. If you have further questions about these classes, please ask me in the comments and I will try and reply. Tried to get everything in here that I could, but I may have missed some things.